Hello, and welcome to the Industry 4.0 Club. I'd like to wish a good local time to everyone. Also referred to as the I-40 Club, our main purpose is to engage the power of diverse worldwide talent to accelerate the global evolution to Industry 4.0. We do this by hosting respectful, thoughtful, and interdisciplinary conversations. Our aim is to create quality content on wide-ranging I-40 topics to expand the reach of the community. This is Women in Manufacturing, our Monday conversation with the focus on tech and manufacturing. In this space, we discuss the perspectives and challenges of women at work and at home. Our topic of conversation for today is titled Rejoice, Don't Resolve, Positive Psychology for Better Change Outcomes. That's a long title. I'm Carol Mitchell-Lin, an Industry 4.0 Club co-founder. And for over 5 years, I've been creating content for I-40 adoption in manufacturing. And when I'm not supporting my fellow co-founders, I'm a content marketing specialist at Raven AI, and there we help manufacturers engage operators to provide a meaningful human context to production on the shop floor. First, I'd like to introduce my co-host and fellow co-founder, Grace Donovan. Hi, Grace.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Carol. I'm Grace Donovan. When I'm not here hosting conversations with the Industry 4.0 Club, I work as the head of business development for the US for Andonics. We're a connected worker solution, connecting the top floor to the shop floor in manufacturing and making sure that people are connected to the right people at the right time to reduce problems and accelerate responses. So really excited to be here today. And Rhiannon, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Grace. Yes, and Grace, this is our last live stream for the year, so I wanted to say thank you for being my co-host for 12 months, and it's been a great 12 months. Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure's mine, truly.
Now, Rhiannon, you are the Chief Business Psychologist at Action Engineering, and I'd like to welcome you today, and just let the audience know that Rhiannon, like I said, is the Chief Business Psychologist, and part of what Rhiannon does is creates plans, designs the communication strategies that help make transition and adoption to change, specifically in the world of 3D modeling. And Rhiannon brings the insights of sociology, psychology, and other social sciences to MBE coaching, we'll get to that a little later. And one of the unique ways that Action Engineering assists their customers, Rhiannon, and that's one of the ways they do it. And Rhiannon began her career in technology, designing online community systems in the early days of the web. And after teaching and designing courses on a variety of technical topics, which is what brought you here. So thank you very much, Rhiannon.
So thank you, Carol, for that bio, and Rhiannon, we certainly want to pass you the reins. So, we just gave a kind of an overview of your career and some of the highlights, but we'd love for you to tell us that story yourself and tell us a little bit about positive psychology for those of us who are unfamiliar with the field, and how it brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, so I actually started out as a geographer, and I was really interested in urban geography and how we create urban communities that are healthy and productive, and that evolved into creating online communities, and that evolved into, wow, the tools that people use are rough and it's hard. And so I've spent most of my career helping people who aren't used to having technology in their jobs, who don't use computers on a daily basis, maybe start to use more technology and have more confidence around it. And then a few years ago, I started introducing positive psychology to that piece, because the basis of positive psychology is the idea that maybe it's better to build things off of strengths and off of what people love doing than building things off of gaps and what people might not be as good at, right? So throughout history, a lot of psychology has been based on this. Well, let's study how people are terrible and we'll help them be better. But the truth is that if we focus on the terrible things, we keep finding more terrible things. And that's true in all sorts of ways. And there's good neurological reasons that we'll talk about in a bit about why humans are really good at finding the negative, right? Why it takes so much more work to find the positive. But what we try and do is bring those positive psychology and strengths into these transitions, so that they're less trauma and more positive for everybody involved, not just for the people who introduced the idea.
Yeah. So could you tell us a little bit about how you're applying, these tenets of positive psychology at Action Engineering to achieve the outcomes? Just trying to get at the, how we can leverage this in the workplace. And I know we're going to dive into that a lot kind of in the over the next hour. But how can this help us accomplish what we want to see happen in the workplace? So thinking of, we've just set a lot of new goals, both potentially personally, maybe not yet, maybe waiting for after Christmas for a lot of us to do that, but kind of in the business setting, we're working on setting those goals right now. So how can we use positive psychology to help us achieve these goals that we're setting for ourselves right now?
I think some of it is understanding there's a lot of empathy involved, right? You need to understand that everybody gets motivated by different things. And I think sometimes what we see in the Industry 4.0 conversation is people who are bringing it in are people who are really motivated by doing the new great thing, right? The really cool edge of the tech. Not everybody's motivated by that. And if the story that you tell that comes along with the technology that you're bringing is only about that, here's the new cool thing, you're not going to motivate a lot of people, right? So some of it is recognizing people get motivated also by how much autonomy they have, right? So can we give people a sense of increasing their autonomy, increasing the control that they have over what they're doing, and use that as an incentive? People get really motivated by purpose, right? Maybe bringing in this tech helps our sustainability goals, our carbon footprint, right? Maybe that's really compelling for someone. So understanding that there's a whole bunch of positive motivations that we can use that aren't necessarily come do the new cool thing because it's new and cool.
Yeah, because again, you can look at that as potentially a fad, like, oh, this will come and go. But if it really connects with the core of, or something that I personally care about that motivates me, I'm much more willing to adopt that and kind of put that into practice.
Exactly.
I was wondering, Rhiannon, some people are very good at vocalizing what they want, where their priorities lie, but not everybody is good at vocalizing that, or they might actually not really know. How do you get that out of them? How do you find out really where their comfort is?
And I spend a lot of time sitting on shop floors talking to people, and watching them work, because sometimes the things that people really love to do aren't things that they can enunciate. In user experience, we generally figure that people can enunciate about 60% of what they do in a day, and the other 40% they're doing and they aren't even aware of it, right? So this is one of the problems that we run into when we say, okay, tell us what your process is, and we'll get about 60% of the process. But then there's like, oh yeah, and then there's these other 17 steps that I do automatically that I don't even think about. And so I spend a lot of time really having in-depth conversations with people. This is why when we do pilots, we start very small so that we can really focus on a team and on the individuals in that team. But we also start by, one of the things that we learn is who are the people who set the mood? Who are the social nodes on a factory floor that if they love it, game on. And if they don't love it, everybody's going to be a lot more reluctant, right? And you can use a whole bunch of ethnography, a whole bunch of sociology and anthropology skills to really sit and watch and say, oh yeah, Jim, the process inspector, that's the guy, right? If I can get Jim bought in, it's all going to go better. So it is a lot of in-depth kind of time-consuming work to figure that out.
Now, just last week, one of the fellow co-founders Mike Ungar shared a study with the club from a team at Corn Ferry. And in the report, they have a stat that said that anywhere from 70 to 90% of Industry 4.0 initiatives failed to deliver promised ROI because the leaders didn't take into account the human aspect or human machine tech interaction. And we suspected that you weren't surprised by this, so we wanted to know if we were correct, and maybe if you could help us understand why this is happening.
I think part of it is that motivation question, right? That we aren't spending enough time really understanding how to message about the changes we're doing in a way that's going to resonate with the people that are going to experience the most change. And that's the second aspect of it, is that often when we bring in these new technologies, the people that are bringing them in are the people whose jobs are affected by them the least, right? So when we make a transition to 3D models, for example, the engineer's still using the same CAD software. They're still on the same computer. They're still sitting in the same cubicle all day long, right? But somebody on the floor is going from using something paper in their hands and their beloved highlighter pen, right, to using a computer. That's a gigantic leap. And we've got to respect how huge that is for other people when we're bringing this stuff in. And it's expensive to do that. It's expensive to take the time. And it's hard for people to rationalize. You have to run a marketing campaign, right? You have to brand this, you have to message it, you have to have things, above the urinals in the bathroom, whatever it is, right? There's a lot of marketing work that has to go into this, and people aren't always interested in spending that kind of money. And I think the other thing is that we've built a little bit of, if we train them, they will come, right? All we have to do is train them, and then miracles will come. And in some cases, you train them, and all it means is that they have better ways to slow it all down, right? More informed ways to slow it all down. So I think that there's a little bit of maybe too much emphasis on training too. I think Mike's point that he's bringing up in the chat about gamification is valuable. And I think that does, that can be a factor as well. If you have people that will be motivated by that kind of competition and that kind of sense of accomplishment, right? It gives a little bit of a purpose to it. It can give a little bit of autonomy to it. Oh, well, I did it this way, and my results turned out better than you doing it this way over here. So you can build in a little bit gamification, but not everybody's motivated by that either. The strengths of gamification can a little bit interfere with our diversity work. Right? Because not everybody's, sometimes, like your 18 to 35-year-old, man may be a lot more motivated by the gamification than people of other ethnicities or people of other genders. So we've got to sort of weigh the gamification when we put that stuff in place as well.
Thank you very much for that. And I appreciate the point on diversity, because that also brings into like another aspect of ways that we need to be empathetic. You mentioned there's perhaps, if I'm someone who's already very familiar with working on a computer, asking someone to, learn a computer skill that is very basic for me might be very scary or a big ask for someone else. And this kind of awareness of, again, motivations or general skill sets can be a big inhibitor. So how are you helping folks to kind of learn what they don't know necessarily? Because empathy has so much to do with awareness of what's going on. And I think in a conversation that we were having in preparation for this demonstration, you also made a point about DEI that like completely reframed how I was thinking about it. And this similar to the point that you made about gamification. Some people might be more motivated by gamification of Industry 4.0 implementation than others, but we need to be very conscientious of who is around us and how we bring them in. So to kind of bring this back to where I started, how can we, what skills are you looking for in teams or practices that you see to raise awareness to then generate the empathy that folks need to make change positive and to make change stick?
We spend a lot of time having people figure out what their own threat responses are.
Okay.
So for example, I can put up with a lot more chaos than some of the engineers on my team. Right. And we've learned that as a team over time. And so, but they can now say to me, I need a little more solidity around what we're going to do here.
Okay.
I need a little more concrete plan. Right. And so what we teach our team, the teams that we work with at clients is how to be aware of their own threat responses. And then they can start figuring out how to be aware of their threat responses in others. Because once that threat response happens, right, and a lot of times all we have to do is say Industry 4.0 and it's threatening, right? People are like, that means taking my job and giving it to a robot, right? And as soon as your threat response happens, what happens is everything goes to your primal brain and your cognitive brain stops working because your cognitive brain isn't very efficient energetically. And so your brain is like, oh, if I can respond to this with my primal brain, I'm going to go ahead and do that. and then no learning is happening. And so you have these people, you've spent all this money, you brought them in, you're having them do this training, and they aren't hearing a thing because all that they have in their head is this is how I lose my job. This is how I lose my job. This is how I lose my job. So we've got to figure out our own threat responses so that we can figure out how to calm other people's threat responses because they can't learn what we need them to learn until they're calm. And we know that, I know this as a parent as well, right?
Yeah.
like there's and a spouse, right? There's a whole bunch of ways that this plays out in our lives that we can see.
So maybe walk us through a couple typical, threat responses just to, do some level setting. One is potentially like fear, right? This could automate my job away. What are some other typical threat responses that you see kind of in a change management project?
A lot of times we see a response that is, I can just ride this one out, right? This is cute, this thing that the new CTO has brought in, and it's adorable. And if I can just kind of make sure that it takes more than 6 months, it's going to go away, and people often have like they've got 5 things on their fingers that they can point to that have happened that this is, like, oh yeah, this is just like that other time. I can just wait it out, right? Nothing to see here. Move along.
Sabotage or avoidance is one.
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of I can maybe if I can just hold out to retirement. I think there's some of that happens, and there's some of that happens on both sides. I think that we'll just slow this down until the people that we think are against it will retire. And then, and then we'll bring in the kids that have grown up on Minecraft and it'll be fine, and that's leading to, I think, across the industry, a slower transition to Industry 4.0 than we really want.
Yeah, I guess, and that brings with it its own host of challenges because that's a lot of experience that is walking out the door, over the next couple of years and making sure that kind of, we don't have an industrial brain drain, so to speak. Right. is an important consideration, I suppose.
Yeah, we do a lot of work building up mentorship relationships, and we'll actually, that knowledge is power, right? Like that, Jim can be really proud of the fact that Jim's the only one who knows how to get that machine, right? And so we've got to figure out how to honor all that knowledge that's there. And so we do a lot of, okay, I'm going to pair Jim with Jake, who's young and really good at the computer stuff. And I'm going to have Jim teach Jake things. I'm going to have Jake teach Jim things, and we're going to see how it all comes together. I've also done things where we've named processes after people, and put little plaques on things, and really celebrated the fact that these people really know what they're doing and they're smart about it, and they deserve respect for that.
Well, I think that taps into another motivator. What a motivator can be recognition, right? So It makes total sense based on what you were saying earlier. Now, we just got a comment in from Scott Phillips. So who is a typical client for Action Engineering, and what are 1 or 2 characteristics of manufacturers that become clients versus those who do not? Or perhaps for those, who are projects that are successful versus less successful. We can also put it that way.
Oftentimes people have tried to implement something and failed at it before they come to us.
Okay.
They're like, oh yeah, we'll just stick the technology in and we'll give them half an hour of training and they'll be fine. And then they're not fine. And then they come to us. So that's, I think the other thing is that we have to have people who are willing to work cross-functionally. things don't work if they're just sort of passed down from product design or passed down from a particular, process improvement or something. That doesn't work as well. Really early on that we need a cross-functional team, and bring somebody in from quality and bring somebody in from the factory floor, and make sure that they are feeling like they're owning a transition from the very beginning. And some companies have cultures where that's easier to do, and some companies have cultures where that's hard to do. They may not know anybody on the factory floor because they haven't talked to them in a while, right? So that cross-functionality is a really key component of what makes a successful client. And awareness that you've got to think about the people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess in that aspect, looking at cross functions and then making sure that, objections or resistance to the project is brought up in different perspectives. So instead of just one area pushing it across, getting perspectives from multiple areas of the company is going to make a big difference in the long term.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a quick reframe and summary of that. Yeah. Carol, I'll toss it over to you next.
You can also look at it as an opportunity to build trust. And the concept that we talked about, Rhiannon, when we first met you, of psychological safety, the trust where you can explain or be critical or have suggestions, where you can feel free to communicate that without repercussion or whatever, being treated a certain way. And I'd really like to know how you work on that with the teams, so people aren't afraid to speak up or express themselves.
Yeah, we do a lot of awareness of each other's threat responses, awareness of each other's strengths on those teams. We do a lot of understanding that the first step of psychological safety in the Timothy Clark model is inclusion safety, right? Is everybody on the team know why they're there and know that they have a role to play. And then the second level is learner safety. And a lot of times learner safety is admitting that you don't know something. Being willing to say, oh, what? That's confusing to me, right? And you actually have to have that level of safety first before you can have and now I want to question why we're doing things the way we're doing things safety. So learner safety is something that we can implement, just kind of give little tinges of it, right? Like on our own team, we have a, wow, messed that up channel in, kind of a Slack channel, right? Where we can say, okay, that didn't go well. And you need leadership to go in and say, wow, these are the things that didn't go well for me. These are what I learned this week. You need leaders, particularly in these big hierarchical organizations, you need leaders who are willing to say, this is what I learned from somebody today. This is where I was wrong and I changed, right? And that says that you can be at any level in the hierarchy and be changing and evolving and learning. And that's key. If we can get that in place and have those teams go out to their home teams and sort of infiltrate that idea that you can make mistakes and you can admit that you don't know stuff, that's a huge step forward.
Because I think that's also sending a message around, failure, quote unquote. That because you didn't know something, even if it did constitute maybe a minor failure or a mistake, that is acceptable and okay in the pursuit of this broader goal, whether that be implementation of this new software or like a big Industry 4.0 transformation, that it's okay to fail in pursuit of this goal.
Mm-hmm. And that you're still valuable and part of the team regardless, right? Yeah, and that really turns failure becomes then a stepping stone, which is what we always talk about, but we have to be really explicit about doing it. It's not easy. It's not easy stuff.
No, certainly not.
What have you mentioned? You mentioned learning several times, Rhiannon, and maybe acknowledging that people learn different things at different rates, where maybe young people might pick up tech a little faster, where older people might need more time, or even to be reassured that we don't expect you to learn this overnight. We know it's a process. Is that something that you've experienced as well?
Yeah, and that's why we often try and do pilots that are not production level pilots, where there's no time pressure from a customer. Can we make a part that we know how to make, that we know how to make in a 2D way, and we know what the timing is on that, and then let's try and make it in a 3D way, and recognizing that every transition has this pit, right? Mm-hmm. Where everything is slower and harder, and you don't remember why you started doing it. And we got to help people ride that pit out. And part of it can be figuring out what those small successes are and really consciously celebrating them. Saying, hey, we managed to get a design out that didn't have, 50 items of feedback on it. That's huge. Or our design review process took 3 weeks less than it used to take because we were able to, have better feedback loops because we're moving to this digital world. That's huge. We've got to be conscious about celebrating those small wins, because that gives people that permission to sort of make those mistakes in a box that's not going to affect their entire careers in the production line. Mm-hmm. And in an airplane somewhere, right?
Well, and I think it helps them connect back to that purpose of, and why are we doing this? Having those little wins is really important. Just last night, I was watching a video of someone doing bouldering, and so you're climbing up this boulder, and they failed over and over and over and over again. This video was, I'll say, 30 minutes long. 25 minutes of it was just them failing. And I was reflecting. I was like, I would have given up by now, because we're just not seeing any improvement. But they were very, very focused on the tiny little things that they were doing better. And of course, at the end, they were able to achieve their goal of getting to the top of this. But to me, as I was, again, preparing for today, I was thinking, like, that's that use of, again, positive reinforcement, celebrating those small wins when you are in the face of, when you're constantly failing, keeps you that motivation to keep going. Because I looking at that on the outside, I was like, I'm out. But yeah, if that's something that you're committed to, this was just from a completely, totally different standpoint, but where I was able to see that kind of put into practice.
And you see that in sports too, right? I mean, people don't, yeah. My son's learning a new skill in lacrosse. He's not watching people who are terrible at it, right? He's watching people who are really, really good at it, right? Mm-hmm. Like and we spend so much time on gap analysis and on figuring out where we're terrible, when what we really need to do is
between me and the greatness, right?
Yeah. What we really need to do is start saying, well, here's this thing that I did better today. Here's this thing we did better on this run. That's excellent.
Well, lots of ways that we can put this into practice. So kind of speaking of that, and we've spent a lot of time already kind of today focusing on how we do this kind of at work or for large change projects that we have. But I wanted to kind of put this, personally, and kind of invite this exercise, for us. So as the new year is approaching and people, after Christmas, we start thinking about what we want to do differently or better in the new year. When introducing change, to our personal lives or again to an organization, what should our focus be? I think, how can we bring these tenets of positive psychology into our own personal goal setting, and then again reinforce that professionally?
And I've convinced Grace and Carol to run an experiment with me. We're actually going to try to do this live, and this is a sort of a simplification of conversations that we have on shop floors. So the first question I'm going to ask you is for each of you to give me a time, and be as specific as you can, where you loved being part of this podcast, where it was everything was running smoothly and you loved it. It could be in front of the camera time, but it could be behind the camera time too, right? You guys do a lot of prep work and a lot of work afterwards, mm-hmm. and maybe those are the times you love best. So Grace, you can start, but think of the time where you really loved doing this.
I'd say, so this year, and just kind of as a reflection for our audience and our community, is we've really transitioned from Clubhouse, where we were having our conversations on a weekly basis, again, over audio, and we've transitioned that over to LinkedIn, where we're now having conversations on video, and some interaction has transitioned over to chat. So that's been a big transition that we've done this year. And I think for me personally, where I felt at my best was really in front of the camera, kind of doing live, having the engaging conversations. And of course, there's some conversations that we have prior to getting in front of the camera that really help set us up for success. But it's just so fun and energizing for me, especially to kick off my weeks with a great conversation with amazing, women and amazing guests. It really sets up my week, and that's something that I personally very much enjoy. And so a couple conversations that really come to mind that were, some of my highlights over this year was with Erin Carroll discussing leadership. She also has her own podcast called Leading with Her. She was just such a very engaging guest. Speaking with Alex Barber as well, who's doing a lot with frontline worker engagement. Perhaps Carol and I are biased. We spend a lot of our time focusing on the shop floor worker. And speaking with Anissa Muthana last week and Lawrence Fitzpatrick, all around, great questions and building like personal boards of directors, which is a conversation we had with Kristen Dickinson. I just think like spending time with our guests has been like my highlight and where I feel kind of at my best.
All right.
So, it was very long, but I'll toss it to Carol. Where do you feel at your best? Oh, you're on mute. Phrase of the year.
Yes.
Second.
I think for me, and one of the reasons why Grace and I actually work well together was when I was at my best. I felt at my best was probably in the early September, when we had all of our trailblazing guests all lined up and ready to go for the entire fall season. And Grace and I had met with everyone beforehand to get to know them a little better. And it was all planned and ready to go. And I was like, that's great. And it had become easier over time. When we meet somebody and we say, this is what we've done, would you like to join us? Rather than a year ago asking people, we're trying to build this, would you join us? And for me, that was really the when I felt at my best. So opposed to Grace, I got my energy from off screen doing the planning and organizing. And I think that's one reason why we work well together.
Yes,
So
we complement each other's strengths.
Right. So that's the second question, right? So you need to have this story really clearly in your head about when you're working at your best. And in the Industry 4.0 context, the truth is that I ask this question every time. The most of the time, people don't say the thing that we're going to automate, right? When you ask that question, right? People are like, oh yeah, it's when I was mentoring somebody or when I was working with my team, or it's very rarely when I was copying data from one spreadsheet to another. That's when I was, it's very rarely that, or when I was just standing there watching something happen. So every time that we ask this question, we're getting a little closer to what people really love about our jobs. And that's not the part that Industry 4.0 takes away. But you have to cognitively come to that on your own. I can tell you that all day long in every training. You have to cognitively realize what you love about your job and when you're really at your best. So the second question then is, what's a strength that you brought to the podcast this year? We'll have Carol go first this time. So what's a strength that you brought? And it could tie in with your story, but it doesn't have to.
It does, actually. For me, setting up a process for Grace and I to, right at the beginning, when we first meet somebody that we would like to have as a guest, and the process that leads from that, and that includes like emails, organizing how we're going to communicate with our guests and help them feel at home and valued as part of whatever series we're doing at the time, and leading right up until all of the assets we need for the live stream, right until the end and the final thank yous. And I think those were where my strengths lie, and in finding gaps and then filling those.
I can verify. This is
Yes, me too.
All right, Grace, what about you?
I think, again, it really comes to, again, being that like in front of the camera. One of the strengths that I have, which I can look at it, in a number of different ways, but is, comfortable with innovating or kind of going with the flow, whether that's improvising or, using a script, because we do prepare a lot here, but we're following the flow of these conversations. And that's something that I have gotten very comfortable with. This is a skill that has been built over time. The first time I hosted I had no idea what I was doing. And I think I talked a lot to make up for that. And I can just see how, I can see my own progression, hosting a lot of these discussions and how much more comfortable I've gotten. But a lot of it comes back to being comfortable with some flex and jumping around and just seeing where things take us.
And I think you probably both could have figured out a dozen strengths for each other, right? And that is one of the exercises that we do is what do your teams see as your strengths? It's really interesting how much variation there is around people's ability to come up with their own strengths, right? Yes. And that varies by gender hugely. Mm-hmm. That can vary by ethnicity, depending on the culture that you've been raised in. It can frankly vary by your mother, right? and how your mother felt about that kind of positivity. And what can end up happening is that you can have one person who's really good at enunciating what their strengths are and another person who isn't. And that doesn't mean that they're not both good at the job. Mm-hmm. Right? So coming up with little places like this to let people practice knowing what your strengths are and owning them yourself and saying them yourself is pretty huge. So then the next step, and you don't have to do it live today, you can kind of think about it. But the next step is, so rather than coming up with a resolution, what's a way that you can build on that strength that you've already enunciated? What's a way that Carol can make that planning strength even more of a powerhouse and Grace can make that improvisation strength even more of a powerhouse going forward, right? So it's not saying, here's where you're terrible, you should go fix that. It's saying, hey, wow, this is where you're amazing. You should build on that. And a lot of the things that you think may be weaknesses will kind of come along for the ride if you build on that strength. So it's a very different approach to doing this sort of year-end analysis.
Yeah, I like it. And it goes back to, I think this is a discussion we kind of had around, again, that comes to what we started with today, is focusing on positives and building on those strengths. And if there are gaps that are critical, okay, how can we work to, patching that to an acceptable level? But then how can we become and excel at, our best? Because this is really where it's going to come naturally, where it's going to be easier and where we're going to be able to see the most progress and feel good about it too. Because it isn't always the most motivating or exciting thing to work on my deepest weaknesses. But it is a lot more exciting to be like, okay, I'm going to focus on what I know that I'm really good at, what I know I excel at, and it builds confidence. And having that confidence is critical to making that change, right?
I'd like to know, in the area of positive psychology, we tend to get into routines or mental routines or loops, or we get set in our ways. And I'm wondering how maybe we can learn to reframe or use different language, or even different self-talk to kind of reframe things that we've been used to doing over time.
Yeah, part of it is just recognizing it. So I said earlier that people were really good at negative, and what happens neurologically is that a negative experience builds a neural network that's about 7 times stronger than a positive experience.
Wow.
And there are really good primal reasons for that, right? That is see that plant? That's the plant that killed Larry the last time. We really shouldn't eat that plant, right? It's very closely related to the fact that humans can see more range of color in the color green than they can in any other color on the spectrum, because we had to know that, right? You had to remember that was the bad plant. Really, no, that was the bad plant, right? We're past that now, but that negativity still stays, right? We know from research that teams are at their most effective when the positive comments outnumber the negative comments between the team by 4-1. Anything more than that is a little cheesy. Anything less than that, and you've got too much negative going. So part of it is being aware of the negative and positive. And I will sit in teams. I will sit in team meetings and tag it. I will keep little tally sheets. I think another thing that we talked about is making sure that your team's laughing together. Teams that laugh together are 19% more effective than teams that don't, right? Because behind laughter is a sense of psychological safety. Most teams that laugh together are laughing at themselves, or laughing at something silly or goofy that happened, and that's uniting them as a team. So all of those things, as long as we become more aware of them, we can often bring that practice in. But yeah, we're really good at the negative, right? That's the thing, 3:00 in the morning, you're still going over the conversation in your head about what you should have said, right? And like I said, really good neurological reasons for those negative things to be so strong. So we have to be very explicit about calling out the positives. We have created something on our team that we do. We do sort of a kind of a Teams check-in at the end of every week, right? And we have 3 things that we put on there: our glows, what we really loved about this week; our grows, opportunities for growth this week; and our gratitudes, right? So 2 out of the 3 is positive. And then, and by the time you get all of that positive stuff in at the end of the week, wow. And sometimes you have to hunt for it, and you have to think, wow, what was the good thing? Because this week was hard. But there's always something you can have a glow about. And we added the gratitude in later, and it was sort of interesting to watch that form, right? Because the team has ended up, it's really a chance to call out a teammate and to say, hey, thank you specifically for being amazing this week, right? And so we can be explicit and conscious about that stuff. And now that's part of our routine. It's something that everybody does every Friday before they check out for the week.
I think it's a great way to end the week with a reflection, kind of a good transition into the weekend. Sounds lovely.
I like that
Carol,
idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I like that idea of being grateful for something that someone else has done. Because sometimes it is hard to think about what we're grateful of within our own scope. But if you actually extend it to the people in your team, or to people that you're grateful for being around when something didn't work and you had to do some quick problem solving, and someone just happened to be there that could offer some experience or advice, and then you're grateful for your team members and their input.
Mm-hmm. And gratitude builds happiness, right? That's there's a great TED Talk on that, right? Being grateful builds more happiness. It's not being having everything that you need builds the happiness. It's being grateful for what you've got that builds the happiness. So it's a quick little gratitude practice, and it works for your remote teams. You don't have to all be on the same site, and that's important too, right? As we change to a lot more remote work or multi-site work, we can be kind of explicit about that stuff electronically.
Doing a quick mic check. Are you able to hear me?
Yep.
Great.
We're okay.
Minor technical difficulty. No, I think so this is maybe coming down and kind of back to like a very tactical exercise that people can do. I've read a lot of studies that mention, you are, 25% more likely to achieve your goals if you write them down. Do you implement a lot of that as well, kind of when you're working with change management around like writing down goals and making sure that those are visible, or that's like a practice? Is that something that you work a lot with?
Yeah, we work a lot with transforming pain points into benefits.
Okay. Yep.
And we work a lot with coming up with both. You can do these mission and vision exercises, and we do them, and they're really fun. But we also make people come up with their own personal visions. So there's the VIA character strengths assessment, which is a positive psychology assessment that sort of gives people rankings from 1 to 24 about what your strengths are. And armed with those strengths, people come up with their personal missions at the organization. And I've had people also come up with their personal missions in their lives, right? One person said once, I want to be a better parent than my parents were. right? That's wow, right? And so we actually have people come up with those personal missions first, share them with the team, and then we come up with what the mission and vision is for what we're trying to accomplish, right? Because then we know who we are, and we're bringing all of those strengths into that mission and vision, and that's a lot more compelling. And then we create a gigantic communication campaign. Mascots can be involved. Like slogans, cartoons. I've got a comic book app I use, and we create comic books of personas and send comic books out to people. Like, yeah. Then we come up with a gigantic campaign that keeps reinforcing that with a whole bunch of feedback loops, so that everybody who's getting involved in this change has opportunities to really own it and contribute to it. And we celebrate those. That goes back to Mike's gamification conversation. We can kind of gamify that feedback and really celebrate the people who are offering feedback. Whether it's good or bad, the act of offering feedback is gigantic.
Yeah, right. The saying is feedback is a gift.
Yes.
And Pam has just commented, gratitude practice is a gift, speaking of gifts, to the individual self-care and the teams at work.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I think what we have to recognize is that if we were all in one space, right, you have to think about work in an office, right? If we were all in one space and we that kind of casual gratitude, like, oh, thanks for holding the elevator. Oh, thanks for being the one that filled the coffee maker. All of that stuff would be happening. Now that we're more dispersed, we have to be more conscientious about making it happen in electronic ways. And that grows and gratitude practice is one of the ways that we can do that electronically. So because the truth is in natural interaction, it was much more common when we were all in one cubicle farm.
Yeah. And even if you are working like in a physical environment, but you're part of a cross-functional team, you might be working with people in a different plant or even in a different country, right, where that still comes into play very much so. Yeah, where you need to be very intentional about having these feedback loops and having those moments of gratitude and recognition.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So while we're talking about like successes, this has certainly been an inspiring and uplifting conversation. Definitely checks the box that this is a great way to start off my week. So I hope that's the same for everyone who's tuning in for us today. So I want to keep our focus on the outcomes we can achieve. Again, focusing on the upcoming year at work, focusing on goals that we have personally. Can you share your favorite success story of using positivity to achieve better business outcomes?
Sure. So we had a small plant that we were working with. We went in and did interviews with them before we tried to take them into digital and ways of working. And it quickly became clear that one of the social nodes, one of the people that everybody knew was a guy who was in processing, who did the masking and painting on the parts before they went out the door. Mm-hmm. Everybody knew him. Everybody loved him. Great big teddy bear guy, right? And we said, what do you love about your job? And he's like, I love it when I finally get to paint. And I said, what do you not like about your job? He's like, I don't like talking to engineers, right? Because what he wanted to know was he wanted to have all the information he needed to do the painting, right? That's that autonomy motivator. Mm-hmm. And without having to talk to anybody about it. Valid. But because everybody knew him and was really sort of bought into his success, we kind of focused on him a little bit. Came back 18 months later, he's using the computer, he's got it all. He's like, I talk to engineers less. It's like, yay, right? But and then that becomes a story that we tell, right? That becomes a story that we let people know, like, hey, it really worked for George, and here's why. And people are willing to tolerate a little bit more of that dip, a little bit more of that hard part for them personally, if they know that somebody that they care about has made it out. Mm-hmm. So but again, it takes time and it takes intention to go back and say, okay, George, how's it going? Yeah. Right. And he was so happy because all of a sudden more of his time could be spent doing the parts of his job that he really, really loved.
Yeah. So like if we break that success down a little bit, kind of based on some of the things that we've talked about today, it's one, focusing on the aspects that he loved about his job. Like he really liked painting, didn't love talking with engineers. And so the automation part, that was really the discussion with engineers. Could you maybe dive into that a little bit more?
Well, because what we were doing was giving him, then he had a 3D model rather than a pile of drawings.
Yeah.
And he could understand, and he could click on a surface and see what he needed to paint. Right? Or he could click on a processing technique and everything would turn the right color, right? So it was all color coded for him, and he could turn it and rotate it and see it, and he had never used a computer at work before. He had started out as a custodian and worked his way up, right? And so we were not sure about how he was going to do with this, but he was so bought into the idea of having more autonomy. And we understood that motivation, understood that purpose, that he was willing to write out the hard parts of learning how to use the computer for the first time.
Yeah. I think, and like focusing on that success, I mean, I think I'm coming kind of back to this idea of the first follower. If just in case the folks aren't familiar, change, you can have like this crazy idea, and it could be brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But if you don't have someone that is going to be the first one to raise their hand and say, I'm coming with you, I also think this is a good idea, it's going to validate it, chances of success are not all that great. And I think there's a classic YouTube video of someone dancing on a hillside, and until the first person gets up and starts dancing with them, then it becomes this big old dance party. But until that other person validated the idea, in this case, the change and implementing a new 3D modeling software, that drives a lot of adoption in that organization. So if we look at the bell curve too, focusing on different role models, not only at the upper levels where, hey, we've got management that's really bought into this idea, but then who can we celebrate throughout the organization that's doing things really well that can also help other folks adopt it, again, by helping lower their threat responses of like, hey, this did this for me, I get to do more of what I love about my job. And so there's a lot of different facets to that success story that you shared.
Yeah. And it made a huge difference in that company's ability, people's willingness to write out the hard parts of that transition, right? Just one story. Yeah. Again, bringing it back to the reminder of why we're doing this and what we're hoping to achieve. This is kind of a benchmark in that journey. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, I think we've got about 5 minutes left. This has been amazing. We could keep talking for a really long time. But if folks in the audience who are tuning in today are looking for more information on positive psychology, or would like to get in touch with you, how is the best way to reach out to you, and where would you potentially direct them if they're looking for more information on this topic? Find me on LinkedIn. You can positive psychology has a few sort of centers of excellence. Center for Appreciative Inquiry is one. The Cooper Ryder Center at Case Western, I think, is one. So there are some centers where you can sort of get up to speed on particularly the appreciative inquiry aspects of it. The VIA Character Strength Study is a good thing to check out. VIA, okay. And there's a dozen books on it. So you can spend your whole holiday break reading positive psychology if you want to. But yeah, feel free to find me on LinkedIn, and I can send people more specific resources if they need them. Excellent, thank you.
Excellent, and maybe we can backtrack and get some of the links in the comments from this live stream later. We can maybe go back and get that done. Mm-hmm. Yep, so like you mentioned, Grace, we're close to the end of our chat today. But before we finalize, I'd like to do a final thoughts and takeaways. And maybe Rhiannon will give you the last word. So Grace, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, I think it is, and this is something I've learned the hard way, I think, in my personal life, around the benefits of focusing on, again, the strengths versus the gaps or the negatives. And it's motivating to think about things that are positive and the changes that we want to see. But being very diligent about tracking those progresses and just writing down those little mile markers or things that we're grateful for, whether that's, again, professional or, organizational goal or personal. This has just been an excellent reminder and certainly given me more knowledge to kind of put behind that new habit that I feel like I'm still building around positivity and positive thinking, building that confidence. And this has kind of been, we've seen little threads of this theme weaved throughout a lot of our broadcasts throughout the year, the importance of having confidence, the importance of having like a go-getter attitude, especially in the face of a lot of challenges. So that this has just been kind of the star on the top of the tree, so to speak, or the cherry on top of the cake. So that's really been my takeaway. And this has just been fantastic. So thank you, Rhiannon, for spending this hour with us. Carol?
Excellent. Thank you, Grace. I liked the 3Gs, Rhiannon, that we talked about, the glow, grow, and gratitude. And I think they can be applied to, like you said, within teams, large and small, at all levels, as well as in our personal lives and even as parents. So I like that, and it has a lot of flexibility to it. So that's my final takeaway. So how about you?
I have, I've watched a lot of the things that you guys have done this year, and I've loved. I think overall you naturally have a kind of a positive focus, and so I really appreciate that Industry 4.0 Club is taking the time to try and figure out this people piece. I think people kind of wring their hands and like, oh yeah, the people are hard, but there's all sorts of things that we can do. There's all sorts of things that we can do that make that people part easier. And we shouldn't be afraid of it. We are going to have to, pay for it, like both in time and effort, right? Mm-hmm. But it's worth doing. And it is the thing that's really going to galvanize these transitions that we're all committed to making. So embrace it, because there's so much that we can do. This isn't something that we have to stand there and say, wow, we should just wait till everybody retires. And then we'll be like, no, there's no need. we can keep moving, and we can get everybody bought in. We just have to spend a little bit of conscious effort on it.
I really appreciate that. I think just to kind of, add on there, it's where a lot of the conversation with kind of Industry 4.0, Industry 4.5, and Industry 5.0, which are all around the corner, really have a primary focus on people. And I think we're beginning to shed a little bit of this focus on, purely tech, that I think, again, triggers that threat response that people hear of like, oh, Industry 4.0, my job is leaving. And, over the years, I think there has been a natural evolution of, oh, this is still very much about people. And so I really appreciate you bringing that point to the forefront, because so much of what we're trying to accomplish, the broader we here, really isn't going to be possible without people. They're still the core of everything. And we're just trying to enhance it with technology.
Exactly.
So, yeah. With that, we will sign off for the year. So thank you, everyone, for joining us and for being part of all of our broadcasts this year. It's been fantastic. We will be back at it in January. So we're going to take some time off to enjoy, the holidays, and hope you all have a wonderful holiday season.
So, and thank you again, Rhiannon, for sharing your knowledge and experience with us, and everyone in the audience who joined today and commented and asking questions. We appreciate your participation. And yes, thanks very much, and have a good day to everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and Happy New Year.
Bye.